Hey guys, so this video you're about to watch is one of the first lectures I give in majority of my trainings, and I call it the three sacred rivers. What it does is map out these three Vedic systems of Ayurveda, classical yoga and Tantra yoga, and we explain what each of these systems focuses on individually. And then at the end we look at them as one big integrated holistic system of health and well-being. So please watch all the way to the end. There's lots of very valuable information in there. Enjoy. All right, so these three rivers, or three sacred rivers, three streams, there's lots of different names for them. And in this particular system, we look at them as these three main sort of seemingly separate systems and what they each focus on, and then how they are a whole integrated whole. And we could actually add more systems to this model, really, but the three cover all of the grounds, really. You know, we could add Vedanta and Dvaita Vedanta and Advaita Vedanta, all these different things. They're all coming from the Vedic knowledge, but these three really cover it for me in terms of what I teach anyway. And we started off with that meditation at the beginning where I sort of have you go internal, in sort of, we turn the awareness in and we start being aware of what we are. What is this being? What's this vehicle I'm in? And we look, and I say, you know, sort of close your eyes, so you're starting to bring the attention inward already into this sphere of this being here. We start focusing on the breath, so that does bring our awareness more internalized. And then I ask you to, you know, sensations, how does it feel in the physicalness of your body? So on an emotional level and on a sort of qualities, do I feel heavy, light, or sore, or achy, or, you know, calm or comfortable, that sort of thing. So we feel into the physical body, which is an aspect of our being that's sort of most apparent, physicalness of us. And then within that, we look at the subtleties of energy moving throughout it. So we've got the physical body, the energies of the breath moving through it, and all these little channels and things that make everything operate and bring it to life, and prana. And then the aspect of mind that's actually the different aspects of mind, but one of them is the sensory experience of the feeling. How does my body feel? How do I feel? You know, what's my response to what's going on around me in the world at the moment, my emotional state, what are my quality of my thoughts, that sort of thing. So that's one aspect of the mind. And then the witness part of the mind that's really watching that part of you have this emotional and physical experience. So that's the mind. So we've got all three there. And then if we go back a little further from the, you know, from the mind witness into this experiencer, you know, the seer, the complete seer, then we're really looking at soul. So we've got physical body, energetics, subtle body, and mind. Okay. And the soul we put into the energetics part. So when we look at those three aspects of our being, and we're looking at this, what we're learning with all of these different trainings is this holistic system that covers all aspects of our being. The last one is around this, what's the idea of a holistic practice? You know, what does holistic practice mean? And it's exactly this point. It's like, what's something I'm doing in my life that's catering to all three of those aspects of my being, my physical being, my mental aspects or faculties, and energy and soul and spirit. You know, how can I bring all of these into one experience? And what practices and different techniques and methodologies that encourage me to have an experience of all these three things together, so they're not separating, you know, because there's a lot of people that'll hone in on one aspect. I'll just work on the physical body, and that's okay. You know, the physical body gets in great shape and looks good in pictures and all that sort of thing. Great in the modern world, you know, and you just need a new photo shoot every month and all that sort of thing. But don't do any work on the mind and have very little connection or even awareness of the inner being, soul, you know. Or there's the opposing. There's not just one version. So that's one. That's a pretty common one. We just focus on the physical body, and that's really it. But then I have a lot of this experience of the other side of things, where I know people who are really spiritual, and they're always talking about the astro and astrology and all of the, connecting to this outer realm, and are completely disbodied. They're completely out of their body, and their bodies are getting sick, and they're getting all sorts of ailments in their physical bodies, and they're completely disconnected. And even the spirituality is not grounded. It's astroturf land. It's just floating around in inner space. And a lot of the time it's just not wanting to be in the body because there's too much unresolved discomfort in here. So we sort of skip, this is not always, but I'm talking about imbalances in non-sort of holistic practices, is let's just skip to spirit land because this is a bit too difficult to deal with, or it takes too long, or it's just too uncomfortable to deal with, emotional, physical realm. So either way, or someone that's just super heady and super analytical, then maybe they're just in that realm. They're just stuck in one of these realms. They are all imbalances, and none of them are integrated. So the idea of what we're studying here is the integration, and that's the key. That's the key to what we call svasta in Ayurveda. It's really optimal health, but optimal health and all those aspects, not just optimal physical health. Svasta means self. It means being established in thyself, is what swasta is. It's SWASTA, swasta, or SV, depending on which way you want to write it. And it's about being established in the self. So in those terms, and what it's talking about is in all of these three realms, in our physical and mental and energetic spirit realms, not just one of them. So that's really what this model is about. And that's why I draw this model. So in terms of that, all three of these systems have some aspects of some focus on all of those: the physical body, the mental body, and the energetic body. They all do. They all have focus on all three. However, each system can focus and highlight one of those aspects more. And if we're looking at it like that, and this is just very generalizing, but if we look at it, we can say that the Ayurveda really takes care of physical body. It prepares the physical body for the optimization of living in a physical body, and also for spiritual practice, to prepare it for these heightened energies that we need to be able to contain and carry in order to access these other realms and other parts of ourselves. So it's fine-tuning this instrument. Okay. Purification, strengthening it, stabilizing it, having it function optimally, all of those things. Okay. So really that's, well, let me say this too while I'm on that. So we look at it so I sort of look at Ayurveda in two ways. It's a set of principles, and it's the principles of nature. And nature is everything in our universe. What's in it, And the principles of nature include things that are, made by man or redesigned or even altered. They've all come from nature at some point, and they've all got qualities of nature in it. And this is something I've used to trip out on years ago. It's like, well, what's the difference between something that's natural and something that's fabricated? Because they've all come from natural resources, right? Even the most fabricated, crazy things were put together by putting together all these different elements, and then we made a plastic pen. But it did come from the ground. It did come from these elements and so forth, whatever it took to make this. So it's all nature, but we're understanding the dynamics of how it interplays, how these elements and qualities interplay with one another. Because we do the same with alchemy in herbalism, in our hatha yoga practices, which is what we do in Tantra a lot. We put these different aspects of breath and posture and bandhas and meditation kriyas and sounds and mantras and all these things in to form what it is we want to form. So understanding the principles of nature is the basis of all of this work, all of it. This is why I brought Ayurveda into all the trainings. I'm like, God, if we don't understand this, I don't know how we would understand yoga or Tantra. if we don't even just have a basic understanding of the 5 elements, the 10 pairs of qualities, right, that we went through, hot, cold, heavy, light, mobile, static, all those sorts of things. If we don't have that as a base understanding, I don't know how we can step forth into the world of tantric yoga in a way that's going to be very systematic and purposeful. I don't know. I mean, you can wing it and hope for the best, and sometimes it may work and sometimes it probably won't. But if we've got these base principles, man, we can apply them to everything. We can apply them to food and cooking, apply them to communication. You can apply them to just think of anything, work scenarios, this and that, marketing. I mean, you can apply these principles to marketing. And you can apply them positively or negatively. You know, you can use them however you want. You can use them as a weapon. You can use them for growth. You can, but it's understanding the principles nevertheless. Because anyone that's masterful in their fields understands some principles to some degree because they know how to use them. The intent behind them then is the key part. What do I want to use them for? Do I want to use these powers to manipulate people and accumulate more power? Or do I want to use them for self-growth and to be an expression of spirit in the world and fulfill Dharma? So really important, the set of principles, and that's really how I like to teach a lot. So that's one aspect of Ayurveda, is it's a set of principles. It's the science of life and the principles of life in this reality. And then the other one that sort of more people look at it is it's a medical system. It's the oldest medical system known to us, as far as I understand. If it's not the oldest, it's one of the oldest, you know, but I'm pretty sure it's the oldest one that they've at least recorded. So it's a specific system to work on people, both to maintain health, and this is where it greatly differs from modern medicine and allopathics. You know, and I mean, allopathic means treats symptoms. I mean, so it's not like they're trying to trick us on it. Wow. It's questionable, but but it's just a different approach to medicine. This focuses on both how to prevent disease. And this is by far the best approach to medicine that I feel like we can have. And this is what I emphasize more and more now, is the approach to understanding ourselves and how we operate and how to stay in the boundaries that keep us in a certain level of health and strength and stability, so we're far less likely to get sick or unwell or have diseases. Far less, and I say far less likely because karma is all a part of it as well. But nevertheless, preventative is way better. You know, if we're aware of all of our actions, we can prevent so much. If we're aware of how we live in the world, if I'm aware of what time I go to sleep, if I'm aware of what I'm eating and how I operate and what I'm watching on screens and how I'm interacting and communicating, and all those things affect your physical health and your mental health, and essentially your connection to spirit too. So the prevention, huge. And also then treating disease. It treats disease incredibly. And one of the ways it treats disease incredibly is it goes looking for the cause. It's not just treating symptoms. I mean, yes, it does treat symptoms as well. So we get some sort of instant relief or, you know, or thereabouts. But they look deeper into it and say, well, okay, so why did this happen? Why do we have this imbalance or disease? And let's go change that part. You know, and a lot of the time that's a mental thing. A lot of the time it boils down to some psychological factor that's set off these behaviors that's led to a disease, more often than not. You know, sometimes it's hereditary, sometimes it's other things, but more often than not, the seed is in the mind. So medical system, see already I'm doing this differently to usual. So there's preventative. And that's, man, this is the future. This is the future of medicine. There's got to be way more preventative health. It's no good just eating and doing and living the way we want. And then, and this is amazing, you know, and this is amazing what I noticed through being a clinical practitioner in Ayurveda for years is the pure lack of awareness around cause and effect, for one. But when people get even chronic diseases, and it's blatantly obvious some of the reasons why, if someone has lung cancer and continues to smoke, kind of thing. I'm not saying this to look down upon them people, but I'm just saying that this is a real thing, that we're just, so much of the population is really still so ignorant to just the basic principles of health. I drink 5 cans of Coca-Cola every day, and I eat Kentucky Fried Chicken basically for 2 meals. I'm extreming it out here, but and I don't know why I have digestive issues, or why I have all these skin rashes, or why I have whatever disorders I've got. I stay up late every night watching action and murder series till like 3 a.m. every night. I don't know why I'm tired and mentally disturbed during the day. I'm not sure why. For real, it's really, I don't get a lot of it these days, but in the early day when I would just sort of do clinical and people just come off the street, not so much yogis. I'm not saying all the yogis are perfect, because that's far from the truth either. But at least I think a lot of people are working on their awareness of self-awareness of how they operate in the world. But still, a lot of the world doesn't. They eat all processed foods and have all these issues, and then just get medication for them. And that's sort of the normal. That's what we grew up with. That's what I grew up with, at least. I'll speak for myself, but that's kind of what I grew up with is, you've got indigestion? Well, here, you can take these. Not what are you doing? Are you drinking a liter of water with your meals? Are you eating 100 miles an hour on the go? Are you talking while you're eating? There's all these causes for it. So many things, drink so much coffee and I'm wondering why I have anxiety. I'm wondering why I'm constipated, or wondering why I'm this or that. But anyway, so that's, it's pretty wild how much of the world still just needs the very basics. Preventative, just how to live more harmoniously with nature. It doesn't mean perfect. We don't have to be so like anal about it, because the opposite extreme is not very healthy either, and we've all seen that. Can't put butter on my bread, that sort of thing. So preventative, and then treat disease. Okay. So it is those two things. So it is a set of principles that apply to everything and anything in the world. And then there is a specific medical system, and where they have specific treatments that are Ayurvedic. They're classic to Ayurveda, like Panchakarma, which is this really deep cleansing purification process that they put people through from 7 to 20 days type of thing. That's one aspect of it. They use a lot of herbal natural therapies and things like that as well. But in India, when it is the full medical science, not so much like here in the West where it's more practitioner style, but where it is the medical science, they do surgery and plastic surgeon. They have eye, ear, throat specialists. There's 8 limbs of Ayurveda called Ashtanga Ayurveda, which means 8 limbs, where there's these pediatrics, there's a list of them. So it's a full medical science there. But in the West, I think a lot of the time it's, let's learn about these principles, just because the systems haven't honored it yet as a licensed profession to make it a full-on doctorate, although they're getting there in the US for sure, where it's almost going to be like you can go in with your, not that they have Medicare over there, but if you go in with your health care and see an Ayurvedic practitioner, which is epic. That's next level, really. What else? So a couple of things they emphasize. If I was to break it down into 3 main things, there's purification, strengthening, I don't come up with a better word, but it does work if I explain it. And then maintaining balance. And this could be doshas, gunas, so forth. Vayus, or just balance, right? But purification is, yes, we purify the physical body, the gut, the digestive system, the colon, all that sort of stuff. Purification, the subtle body as well. Then the strengthening is the strengthening of tissues. It's the strengthening of your immunity. It's the strengthening of your mind and your attitude. All of those things. So stability and all that comes under strengthening. And then 3, just maintaining balance. Stay in the parameters. You know, keep the doshas in balance, keep the gunas in check, cultivate more sattva. Work with the vayus, which ones are out of balance, and so that's Ayurveda in a nutshell right there. You know, then there's all different. There's daily purifications, these extreme ones, so forth, strengthening, you know, building ojas, Ayurvedic psychology, bringing it all in, you know, it's huge. So without going too far into it, that's the basic idea of Ayurveda. It's a huge field. You know, when I look at this, it's interesting because I called everything Tantra forever. Like Tantra just includes Ayurveda and yoga. I could say the same about Ayurveda, really. And you could say the same about all these things. Well, Ayurveda includes this whole aspect of Ayurvedic psychology, which is really just drawing from this. And there's a huge spiritual component to Ayurveda, which is linked to both of these aspects here. So again, it's the science of life. So how would it miss out on the mind and the spirit? But I'm just breaking it down for the languaging and what we're looking at. Okay, so yoga. So yoga, we can really say, if we're looking at classical yoga, which is the way I teach it and see it and understand it, it is mostly focused on the mind. So Patanjali yoga is really, and it's just one of those words, you know, we went through this a few weeks ago, but we'll briefly do it again now. If you say yoga out just in the world to people who haven't studied it, or even people that have studied it but haven't studied it in any depth, it's a really skewed view of what yoga is. To the point that it's just like, God, I just don't want that label anymore. This is just me and my process, you know. It's weird. It's a weird process to go through, and I've been going through it for most of the time I've been teaching it. But most of the understanding of yoga is it's some kind of stretching system, and you somehow add a little bit of singing and so forth to it, and that's it. And somehow it's a spiritual thing. And I don't actually know. I'm going to have to actually start asking people, like, just go out on the street and say, what's yoga to you? What's yoga? You know? So I'm always in the sort of circuits where most of the people I'm surrounded with have been around it for long enough. And we hopefully don't have that view anymore, but a lot of the world still does. So, so this, in terms of what we talk about here, is called classical yoga. And it's a textbook written by this great sage Patanjali. Its history is all over the shop with these systems because they're so old, but it's around about 2,300 years old, something like that. But Patanjali organized all this information and practice. You know, yoga practices and Veda had been around for thousands of years before this era. But what this great sage Patanjali did was organized all these teachings and packaged them into his system, or a system. It's not his system, but he saw this systemized way of collecting all of these teachings that have been around, and wisdom that have been around for so long, and realized that so much of it, of suffering and compromised health and disease and everything in the realms of suffering, was caused from the mind, was caused by some distortion or misconception or delusion of some aspect of the mind. And he saw, even back then, you know, the world was going through sort of even the spiritual teachings were going through a bit of a dark era. The Vedas were going through a sort of a dark era. And Patanjali came in and saw this system that was going to help people, bring people back to a systematized practice and have them own their life again, because a lot of people had gotten quite non-dual and quite disconnected from what they were doing in the world. And they were going into the darkness from that. So this system that he gave and the wisdom he wrote out in these Yoga Sutra was to help people progress out of that era. And so that's where the sutra came in. And he maps out the mind. He maps out the mind, and he maps out all the territory of the different faculties of the mind, all the obstacles that we run into, all the causes of suffering from one way or another that are caused in certain parts of the mind when they're not aligning, these 4 aspects of the mind when they're not cohesive with each other, or not each part. When one part of the mind is trying to take over the role of another part is when we come, when we start having these imbalances. When the manager starts to try and play the role of the CEO, that type of thing of the mind, we start getting, we start having some problems. Okay. So the Yoga Sutra is this great text of 196 short aphorisms that lay out this system. And within this sutra is the 8 limbs of yoga that became the most known today, the 8 limbs. It's not the entirety of the text at all. It's just one part of the text. It's not just a textbook about the 8 limbs of yoga. He's actually just laid it out in this. There's one of 3 paths that he actually lays out in the sutras. And one's a really beginner's path in a sense. And even his beginner's path is a pretty heavy-hitting path. It's for serious practitioners, which is the 8 limbs. Then there's one called Kriya Yoga. And it's not the Kriya Yoga that we know from the more modern Kriya Yoga system of Paramahatma. It is Kriya Yoga in the sense of he gives direction, lays out just 3 directions: surrender to God, consistent practice. What was the other one? Tapas, cultivate this heat and surrender to God and practice consistently. And then the third one is the heavy hitters. Like, this is just for basically expert yogis. It's just practice and surrender, practice and surrender. So the more, the beginner's path that he maps out is the 8 limbs, which is great because, the more lost we are, it's better the more directions we have. If you really map it out, I need lots of directions. If I'm really off path, then I need a lot of directions to get me back on path. But people that are further along in their development need less directions. They've got more intuitive wisdom. They're attuned a little bit better. So they need less directions. And that's what the other 2 paths are about, a little bit less. And then basically the last one's like, just practice and surrender. That's it, and that's ultimately where we get to with practice, is like, just do it and surrender to what you think the outcome is, or anything you lay on it. So Patanjali's a lot, it's a lot of, there is psychology and a fact of understanding sort of personality and so forth, for sure. That's definitely a big part of it. But then he talks a lot about, it does get quite non-dual in the 3rd chapter. It starts talking about Ishwara and things like that. And that comes in even earlier in the 1st chapter. But he starts talking about this place beyond sorrow, which is non-dualism. Because while we're in duality, there's going to be some suffering. We just want to make it as little as possible. Even the ebbs and flows of just the daily doshic movements can cause us a little bit of mild suffering. So he works on this dualistic model of Samkhya. And then he explains the realms of what can be experienced beyond that place. And he gives us practices to do that. Okay. So the 8 limbs, there is psychology. It's hugely meditation based, and connection to soul throughout that. So that's the yoga I'm talking about. There's very little mentioned about asana and postures and all that sort of thing. He does mention just about being steady and calm and still and comfortable in your seated position to meditate. He does talk about pranayama a little bit. He brings up a few techniques. One of them is really one of the techniques I use most of the time now, So he doesn't elaborate on the techniques. He's sort of assuming, it's understood, and my understanding of the sutras is Patanjali was tantric, and he kind of assumed people had done some preliminary practices and knew about how to manage energy in the body and so forth. more in detail, or you had to go to other books to find that. Okay. And so that's Patanjali yoga. So how all the modern day yoga with all the, all of our postures and all of that, really heavily based on that, how that's related to the Yoga Sutras, it just got a bit skewed, because people understood yoga back before it landed in the West as this was yoga. This is classical yoga. Whereas in the West, the postures really took off and all these techniques of power took off. And somehow they linked it to classical yoga, which they're not separate, but it's not the main approach of this path at all. It's a very tiny aspect of this path. So where all the postures and everything come from was over here. And essentially these two things are really just two different approaches in a way to mastering the mind and connecting with soul. That's really what the differences are here. And we'll look at that in probably today as well, these two different approaches. We'll go into that more. So prana, energy. So Tantra is also the source of Hatha Yoga, which we've said, Hatha Yoga. And Hatha Yoga is not a style, and I say this every time, but it's not a style of yoga that's slower. I think I need to do 5 days just saying that. I think I need to do I really do, just from what I still see and hear out there from some of the teachers. It's like, I think we need to do just 5 days where we just simply say Hatha Yoga is not a style of yoga and talk about that. It's a system and methodology of specific practices. And one of them is asana. One of them is bandha. We'll say pranayama, bandhas and mudras, and then nada, which is sort of meditation mantra kind of thing. And we'll go into way more in detail because this is the focus of this training. Hatha Yoga is really just saying, here's the system where we emphasize using the body, and we use it in postures, and in these locks and seals and breathing techniques in order to master the mind and access these higher faculties and realms of living. This was more meditation and knowledge-based. And the tantrics were more like, well, let's manage your energy first, because it's so helpful in terms of working with the mind when we've tuned it in our instrument first. And you can manipulate energy to access more grounding or more expansion or more creativity or more whatever it is we need. So it's the list of these things here. It's Hatha Yoga. So really what we've all been practicing is Tantra Yoga for all these years, whether anyone knew it or not. And we won't talk so much on Tantra because we're going to do that all week, So essentially this Ayurveda is the basis of all the principles of the universe. And it's also a way of optimizing your physical health, also working with mental health and spiritual health. But it's preparing us for these more subtle practices and ways of connecting with our soul and being guided by our soul more than our lower mind and our body. So we're having the soul as the CEO, guiding our mind and our physical body in this world to live more dynamically as we're meant to be. Okay, so this is really the whole big system of what we're talking about. And when we talk about Ayurveda, there's always going to be some aspects of yoga and Tantra in it. We talk about yoga, there's always going to be aspects of Ayurveda and Tantra in it. We talk about Tantra, there will be aspects of yoga and Ayurveda in it as well. Well, just specifically this week, we're going into Tantra. We're going to go into the masterful management of prana, because that's what I meant to write up here too. So it's the masterful use, or if the word masterful is getting a bit too cracked out these days, and it is a little bit for me too, but ultimately it's about the masterful use of energy. But let's just say it's about understanding and managing energy to our benefit. Yeah, ultimately, let's master it, but I think the word master is getting a little bit misunderstood. Someone that's good at something isn't necessarily a master, but anyway. That's the idea, is to master it. But, you know, at this stage, we're just looking to understand it and see how we can use it. First, just understand what it is and start learning to do these techniques where we use postures and breathing. And you do them and see the science behind it, and you come out of it. You know, I mean, I really believe that's why we're all sitting here, is because we all had some experiences of doing these postures and breathing somewhere at some point, and just felt that it did something to us. More than likely, you know, it's like, wow. If you do a really good practice that's really effective, you come up out of it and you're like, I just feel different. You know, whether you judge it as better or worse, it's changed something. And if you do it specifically with a specific purpose, using a specific science, using these principles and applying them to these techniques, now we're starting to have this incredibly powerful and effective science. Fantastic. So now you have a foundational understanding of what these incredible, ancient, powerful sciences have to offer us. I hope you like the content as much as I do. If so, subscribe to the channel and also hit the notifications bell so you don't miss any new videos. We're going to be putting out a lot more free content like this, so please keep checking in to find the new information. We'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.